Thank you all for joining us for the Getting Started with Orchid workshop. Joining us today is Christina Miskey, Scholarly Communication Librarian for Research Infrastructure. She's going to discuss the benefits of researcher IDs, specifically Orchid IDs, and how to create and enhance your own profile. So I'm going to hand it over to Christina to get us started. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here and excited to have this workshop with you. So today's workshop is going to be very interactive. So when it comes time, I'm going to encourage you to ask a lot of questions, participate in, and we're going to have a live demonstration of the Orchid website. So we can also get into that and dive deeper if we have time. Before we get started, I'd like to ask if you can enter your first name and your discipline into the chat so I can kind of see who I have here today. Ooh, clinical psychology, very cool. Okay. Computer science, special education, awesome. Wow, a wide variety of people. That's really awesome. Um, great. So thank you all so much for coming. Yeah, I see we have a lot of education and science, biology people here. So that's really fantastic. I think Orchid and researcher identifiers will definitely appeal to each one of you in different ways. So let's dive right in and get started. Like Navina said, I'm Christina Miskey. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Scholarly Communication Librarian for Research Infrastructure. And these are my dogs. I don't work from home anymore. I'm back on campus, so they won't be participating in today's workshop, but I like showing off my dogs. So these are my two pugs, Buddha and Momo. So today we're going to learn the benefits of researcher IDs, specifically Orchid. You're going to create an Orchid account if you don't already have one. And we're going to get started with populating your profile with background research and some scholarly activity if you have any. So you might be asking, if you have only heard of Orchid but don't really know what it is and what it does, what are researcher IDs and why do they matter? Also called scholar IDs by some people. You might have heard of them before. Because most publishing is online and always growing, there's an ever increasing number of researchers that share similar names or who change their names over time or who want to make sure that others find their research. Another problem that can happen is that publications in online profile systems, like Google Scholar, for example, can get attributed to the wrong person, whether that's you or to someone else. So using a research ID when publishing helps significantly reduce, if not eliminate, these issues. So the next question you might ask is, okay, so what kind exists out there? There are three primary identifiers. Orchid stands for Open Researcher and Contributor ID. Researcher ID, which is owned by Clarivate Analytics and connected to Web of Science citation database, and Scopus Author ID, which is owned by Elsevier and connected to the Scopus database. Researcher ID and Scopus Author ID can get automatically created by Web of Science and Scopus databases, and it's up to you to claim them so any work associated with them can be attributed to you directly. You do have to create your own Orchid record or your own Orchid ID, and we're going to talk more about that soon. Some other examples of researcher identifiers that you might encounter, especially if you continue publishing after, is the Pubmed ID. This is for our medical students or those that publish in the health sciences. This is often associated with researchers that publish in these types of journals. Archive Author ID, this is just one example of the archive preprint server. And this is an ID that was created by that platform and used to identify and disambiguate authors within that platform. And we also have Google Scholar. Now, there isn't technically an ID associated with that, but your Google profile or your Google email address is unique and usually attributed to only one person. So let's get into why we're here today. Orcid stands for Open Researcher and Contributor ID. It's a registry that provides unique, persistent, non-proprietary identifiers for researchers, creators, and contributors of all types from all disciplines. It's continuing to grow as a standard in academia as more and more publishers and grant funders are requiring them. Each individual can create a free account that will always be free to you. And Orcid is supported by institutions like UNLV that pay for membership to grow the digital infrastructure so that researchers like you don't have to pay and won't have to pay down the road. So Orcid helps to solve the problem of name ambiguity by providing a free service for you to register for your own unique persistent identifier known as an Orcid ID to distinguish yourself throughout your career despite any changes in name, career, location, discipline, or other variables. Each person that registers obtains a unique 16-digit identifier that is usually shown as a URL, like here on the screen. You can click on it and be taken to someone's profile, where you can look at their previous work, see other names they've been known as to ensure that you have the right person, and a lot more. A perfect and personal example is publishing under my maiden name before I got married. My maiden name was Thompson, and so Christina Thompson is a very, very common name. It's a very common name. So having my Orcid ID helps follow that, especially after I changed my name. My old publications and my new publications are connected together because I have my Orcid ID and I have those together. So some of the other benefits, as a researcher, once you have filled in your Orcid record and continue to authorize organizations and trusted parties to be connected to your Orcid record, you can use Orcid to distinguish yourself from other researchers, manage your reputation and research impact, get credit for your research and contributions, affiliations, and save time on data entry for funding, publishing, and research reporting workflows. A great example at UNLV specifically is we have the pivot we have the pivot platform for grants that we can use to search for grants, and having a populated Orcid profile will help make the search that you use for grants a lot easier, because you just import all of your previous research and grant fundings and all of that stuff, and then it helps to customize the search that you get using that system. That's just one example. So Orcid is used by major research institutions, publishers, and funders around the globe. There's over 70 publishers now requiring Orcid IDs with your manuscript submissions. And grant funders are increasingly required Orcid IDs for grant proposals as well. Two examples of this would be the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. By including your Orcid ID in publishing and funding workflows, you can ensure that your work and contributions will be accurately linked to you and not accidentally credited to somebody else. Research institutions around the globe are also increasingly using Orcid ID. For example, at UNLV, if any of you end up becoming a faculty member here, the Office of Sponsored Programs requires an Orcid ID when submitting grant proposals through the internal routing form that faculty use to submit grant proposals. We've also integrated Orcid into UNLV Folio, which is the annual activity reporting system that faculty use to report their annual scholarship activities. And you can connect your ACE account to log in with one username and password to make it easier and have one username and password. So now that we've learned a little bit about what Orcid is and what it does, we're going to move on to the interactive part of the workshop. So I've broken this down into 4 big steps that we're going to cover together, and we'll have time at the end and throughout for questions. I want to keep in mind we're going to walk through some steps, and then towards the end, I'll jump into the Orcid website, and then we can have more time for more in-depth exploring if there's something that you want me to go over again or go over more in depth. So first, we're going to start by creating an Orcid account, also known as an Orcid record. So here's how we're going to do this. If you already have an Orcid account first, don't worry, this isn't going to take very long. Go ahead and log into your profile, and you can follow along to check your visibility settings, make sure your email is verified, etc. So first thing you're going to do is go to the URL that's on the screen. I'm also going to put it in the chat for you. And you're going to start by entering in your information, such as your name and what email address that you want to use. And I want you to keep in mind that since you're students and you will be graduating at some point, you probably don't want to use your email, your UNLV email address as your primary email. You can add your UNLV email as a secondary email, but for now, I would recommend using, if you have like a personal professional email that you use, or a personal email, I would recommend using that to register so that you don't lose it when you leave UNLV. So I'll give you a second to open up that website and get the process started. The next thing that you're going to do once you've started entering in your info is it's going to ask you to set your visibility settings. So your visibility settings are going to depend on how visible you want things in your Orcid record to be. And you have 3 options. So everyone, which is the little green symbol with 3 people, means it's visible to anyone. They can go to Orcid, type in your name, and they'll pull up your profile. Trusted parties means it's visible only to organizations or individuals that you give specific access to. So if you have someone you want to collaborate with on creating, you want someone to help you fill out your Orcid account, you can authorize that individual to access your account and make changes. Or an organization like, for example, UNLV, if you want to give them access for a specific reason, then they would be able to see your profile. And then finally, the most restricted version is only me. So this is completely private. So no one can access your record. The only one that can see it is you. So that's going to be ultimately up to you, what level you want to pick. Once you've selected your visibility settings, then you can click register and you should get an email asking you to verify your email address. So I'll give everybody about a minute or so to do this. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat. Before we move on. Kenya, yes, you can change your settings at any time. So if you want to pick visible to private for now while you are creating your account, that's perfectly fine. You can always go back in later and change it. Okay, I'm about to move on. Is there anyone that is stuck or has any questions before we move on to the next step? So next, we're going to start adding information into your newly created Orkut accounts. Make sure that you're logged into your new account so you can follow along as we go through the next steps. So this is probably what your account page looks like right now, except for the part here that says your name. Your name will obviously be there. um, First, we're going to focus on employment, education, and entering some other identifying information today, which you can see by these areas I have circled here on the screen now. You can click to edit any of these areas. You can click on the pencil, or you can click on the add button at each section to edit that specific section. And don't worry if you don't have a lot to enter in right now, that's totally okay. We're just going over these sections and you can always go back later and fill them in more. So like I said on the previous slide, we're just gonna start with the basics. So first, let's add your most recent degree and any current position that you have to the education and employment sections. And you can always go back in, like I said, and add more later. This is just a starting point. And if you want, I can always go back to the previous slide and show you where those sections are. You'll just click to add education. You just click add education, and then you can enter in your most recent degree. So like, for example, a bachelor's degree, if you have that. And then if you have your current position or your most recent prior position in the employment section, you can add that as well. If it's an employment that you don't think is relevant to your future career, we all have those types of jobs, then you don't have to add anything there right now. If you haven't had a position yet because you've been in school, that's okay. You don't have to add anything there right now either. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll go to the next background information section. And feel free to ask any questions that you have as you're entering in that information. Once you're done filling in that information, the next thing that you can do is add background information. So this is supplementary information that tells people a little bit more about who you are. This would include an alternate email address. So you can include your UNLV student email address, for example. If you have a preferred name or other names that you've gone by in your career, then you can add that to your other name section. If you have a website or a professional or career related social media account that you want to include, this is where you would add it. And then finally, the biography section, which is all the very top of your account in the center. This is where you can put a short paragraph, usually 2 to 3 or 4 sentences about who you are and what your expertise is in, but you don't really have to fill that in now. So if you happen to have a biography ready made that you can copy paste into that section, great. If not, don't worry about filling in the biography section right now. You can go back and fill that in later, but it is a good idea to eventually do fill out that section. So I'll give you guys a little bit more time to fill in those informations. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat before we move on to the next step. Cecilia, are you talking about like your Orcid ID, the 16-digit number? Or are you talking about editing the profile itself? You can't edit the number itself. So each number is, oh, the profile. Okay. So I actually have, so on your profile screen, here, I'll just pop in to Orcid real quick. So you're going to click on the left section where it's your the About You section. You click on the pencil, or to edit something that already exists, there's a little pencil next to each little thing that you've entered if you've already entered that in. So I hope that helps answer your question. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section. Don't worry if you haven't finished. You can always go back and continue editing later. So now we've added our background information, and next we're going to focus on scholarship. So this is going to be the fun part. I'm going to walk you through connecting your profile to some trusted organizations that will help make it easier for you to update any past scholarship you might have and new scholarship moving forward. So if you don't have any scholarship right now, that's okay. This is going to help you moving forward as you move forward in your career and you start publishing. Whatever you're working on publishing now, this will definitely help you as you move forward. So first, I want to explain what a trusted organization is so that you understand what you're connecting to. So trusted organizations are typically research institutions, publishers, or funding agencies that have integrated Orcid with their systems, such as a central identity management or profile system, an HR system, a research information and reporting system, publishing platforms, institutional repositories, grant management systems, all of these different systems. It's a good idea to connect your Orcid with as many of your affiliated organizations as possible, because you can often save time by letting these organizations add information to your Orcid record for you automatically. So connecting with trusted organizations increases the chances that your contributions and works will be linked to you, recognized, and credited. The example on the screen here is shown from the University of Virginia, where Orcid is integrated into their institutional repository and allows an individual to authorize the university as a trusted party to add works information to their Orcid record for them automatically. And as you can see, the University of Virginia is listed as the source of this work entry. Organizations cannot add information to your Orcid record unless you give them permission. And I also want to add that anyone you authorize to add information to your account, you can also go back and revoke that access later. So nothing is permanent. Anything you give access to, you can also take it away later. So you have control over who has access to your account and who can make changes to it. So to authorize an organization as a trusted party, the organization must ask you for permission to connect with your Orchid account. When you go to interact with a system that is integrated with Orchid, you'll be prompted to authorize permission from the institution to connect to your Orchid ID. In this example on the screen, the organization is asking for permission to add information to your Orchid record for you. And as we saw in the example on the previous slide, and to read any data on your record that has been set to trusted parties only. So when you are giving access to an organization, it will show on the screen what you're specifically giving access to. So this is similar to like when you authorize an app on your phone to access like your photos or your audio files or anything like that. This is the same type of thing. It's going to list what you are getting access to and what you're giving access to, and gives you an opportunity to either authorize or deny that access. So today we're going to connect to 3 trusted organizations that will help you to populate your Orchid account moving forward. First, we're going to connect to DataCite and Crossref. These are 2 companies that create DOIs, which are persistent identifiers for journal articles, for example. Um, and these 2 companies can automatically add past and future scholarship to your profile once you authorize them to. Then we're going to connect to Scopus, which is a citation database that tracks publications across many journals and publishers. And many of you here are in a wide variety of disciplines. Scopus covers a wide variety of disciplines, so it should cover most of your disciplines. I'm also going to jump into Orchid after we go through the instructions on how to do this and show you how to add scholarship manually and go more in depth into your Orchid record so we can dive a little deeper. So next we're moving, so this is your Orchid record again. We're moving into the works section. So this section is where we're going to spend most of the rest of the time moving forward. And you're going to want to look at the Add Works button. That's where we're going to be spending time. So let's begin with DataCite. So in your Orchid record, you're going to go to the Works section that I just pointed out. Then you're going to click Add Works and then select Search and Link, which should be the first option from the available options that are listed. Next, you're going to locate DataCite on the list that pops up in that work section and click on that. You're going to be taken to a new screen after that asks you to obtain what they call an Orcid token. So this is very similar to authorizing a trusted party like we just talked about. You're going to click on the button that says Get Orcid Token. And what it's going to do is authorize DataCite to connect to your Orchid account. And then future publications will get automatically added to your Orchid record moving forward. And you don't have to do anything after this. So does anybody need me to go back a step or have any questions about connecting to DataCite? Yes, Cecilia, I can repeat. And then, so getting the token is authorizing. Yeah, so if it asks you to authorize, then you would click authorize. And getting the token is is another step in the authorization process. So let me go back a couple steps. So in the works section, you're going to click add works and then search and link. Then you're going to locate DataCite. So when you click search and link, a list is going to appear on the screen. Then you're going to locate DataCite in that list. The list should be alphabetically. And you'll click on the blue DataCite word. And then you're going to authorize DataCite to access your Orchid account and click Get Orcid Token. No problem. Yeah. And then once you've done that, you're done. You don't have to do anything else. So what DataCite will do is when you publish in the future, it will automatically upload any new publications that you have that have a DataCite DOI when you publish. It'll add that to your Orchid record moving forward. So you don't have to do anything else. So does anybody else have any other questions before I move on? Yes, you should have the opportunity to add any past publications. Once you've authorized DataCite, it should be able to add your past publications as well. It should do it automatically. Yeah. No problem. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next step. And this is Crossref. So you're going to go back to that very first step in your work section and you're going to click Add Works and then search and link again. So this is going to be the same couple of steps in the beginning. But instead of DataCite, now you're going to click on Crossref Metadata Search. So once you're back into that, so this is going to provide access for automatic updates, but it's also a search. So it's going to allow you to do a search for your name and see if any of your articles are in the first few results listed. If you do see any of your articles listed, then you can add them to your Orchid account. So once you've clicked on Crossref, it's going to give you a search screen and you can search for your name. If you're like me, you might get a lot of other stuff that's not really related to you that pops up on the search. But if I did happen to be John Bergsagel, writing about Christina Alexandria, Queen of Sweden, and I wanted to add this to my Orchid record, then I would click on Add to Orchid, and it would ask for confirmation if I want to definitely add this to my Orchid record. So what you can do is after you click Crossref, it'll ask you to authorize Crossref, and then and then you can search for your name and see if anything comes up in the search. And if you see anything that you've published previously that you want to add, then you'll click Add to Orchid Record right here. And then you would click Yes if you want to add it to your Orchid account. So this one's a little bit trickier. If you do a search and nothing comes up in the first few results, that's totally okay. You can always go back and do a more in-depth search later, or we can dive a little bit deeper into this search when we get to the demo portion if we want to. So give everybody a minute or so to play around with that. Okay, so what do you do if you do not have a publication? How do you leave the search screen? That's a great question. So I'm going to go into So if you'll notice, when I clicked on Crossref Metadata Search, it popped up a new tab for me. So it should have popped up a new tab or window for you when you clicked on that search. So you should be able to just close the window. And so this is what it looks like. And then if I click on my name, this is what the search screen should look like for you. So if you don't have any publications, then you should be able to just close this window or tab, and it'll take you back to your Orkut account. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. And don't worry if you haven't had an opportunity to try and experiment with different search terms and search options. That's okay, you can always go back and do this later. So next, we're going to connect to Scopus. So this is going to be a few more steps than the previous ones, but we're going to work through this part together. So you're going to go back to your Works section in your Orkut account and click Add Works and Search and Link again. This time, you're going to click Scopus Elsevier from the list. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, Scopus Elsevier. And this is the screen that should come up for you. So first, it's going to ask you to click and select your Scopus profile if you have one that exists. And then to confirm your profile name. So those are the first two steps. So to select your Scopus profile, you would click the checkbox here on the screen, and then you would click Next. And then it'll ask you to pick your name, and then you click Next again. So how do you create a Scopus profile? So Scopus profiles, that should be, you can go into the Scopus database and create that. If you want me to walk you through that, then we can chat. If we have time, I can pop into Scopus and show you how to do that. But if not, we can always chat after this workshop and I can go over how to do that. Yeah, no problem. So if you do have a Scopus profile and you have any works that are created that are in the Scopus database, it's going to ask you to review your publications. So this is going to give you a chance. You can click the X or you can click the green check mark if you want to add a specific publication to your Orkut account. Once you've had the chance to go to that, you can also click View in Scopus to go to the Scopus database and take a look at that publication to verify whether it's yours. Then you're going to click Next once you've had a chance to do that. It'll ask you to review your profile, which is basically just verifying. And then finally, it's going to ask you to send your author information to Orkut. So this is another step in the authorization process. You enter in your email address and then you click Send Author ID. And so what this is going to do is it's going to start the connection from Scopus to Orkut so that your Scopus author ID is connected to your Orkut ID. So if you remember a little bit ago, a few minutes ago, I told you about the Scopus author ID and how that's created through the Scopus database. So this is sending that information from Scopus to Orkut and connecting those two systems together so they talk to one another. Once you've done this, Then it'll ask you to send publications. So if you've selected any publications, then it's going to do one more step and send publications. Moving forward, what will happen is anytime you get a new publication, Scopus is going to send you a notification and ask if you want to add it to your Orkut account, and then you can choose whether you want to add that to your Orkut account moving forward. So does anyone have any other questions about Scopus and Orkut or this process? It's several different steps, so I can understand that it might be a little bit daunting at first. Yeah, this is definitely relevant if you're adding publications from Scopus. So you can use your email address. I used mine because this is my work email address, and this is connected to my Orkut account because it's connected through work. You don't have to use your UNLV email address. You can use I would recommend using the email address that you use to set up your Orkut account. So if you have like a personal professional email address that you use when we set it up about 20 minutes ago, I would recommend using that email address. No problem. No, you don't have to pay for Orkut. It's free. So you've created your profile. You don't have to pay for it. It's completely free. So you can have this through the rest of your career if you wanted to. So now we're going to move on to adding scholarship manually. So adding scholarship manually takes a few more steps. We've covered a lot already. So now I'm going to go into Orkut and give you the opportunity to ask follow-up questions while I demonstrate how to manually add works to your Orkut record. So back in your Orkut record in the work section, you're going to click add works, and then you're going to go all the way down and click add manually. So adding works manually is a multiple step process because you have to input all of the information yourself. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to pick a work category. So this is the general type of work that you want to add. So if you want to add a publication like a journal article, or maybe your thesis or dissertation, a conference publication, intellectual property you've created, you can also select other. And under work type, you can pick a lot of different other options. So an artistic performance, for example, I don't think we have anybody here that does that type of work, but you can. If you've done a data management plan and had that published, especially if you've been part of a grant proposal, you can include the data management plan here. If you've ever published a data set as a part of research that you've done, you can include that. If you ever given a lecture or a speech, if you, for our computer science person, if you've ever created a piece of software and you want to include that, you can add that here, or created a technical standard or anything like that, you can do that as well. We're going to stick with publication, and then you can see all the different types of publications that exist. You always have the option of picking other if you have something that doesn't fall into one of these categories. But for now, we're going to stick with journal article. So you'll have to add in the title of your publication, if there's a subtitle, and the journal title. So this is going to be where your article was published. You'll need to select the publication day. This part is optional if you want to include a specific type of citation. So for example, APA or Chicago or MLA, if you have any of those, you can add the citation information. You can also add an identifier that are related to that work. So for example, if there's a DOI associated with your publication, this is where you're going to enter that information. So the identifier value, the identifier type, if there's a URL associated with that. And then in each section, you'll notice that there's these little question marks that have help so you can get more information. So if you don't know what the relationship part means, you can hover over the question mark and get more information. Then this is the URL. So this is the URL for the publication itself. If you publish in a different language other than English, you can select that language from this list. If you've published in it, if your publication's from a different country, you can also select the country. And then finally, you can select your visibility settings, which is the same 3 levels. So everyone, trusted parties, or only me. And then you click add to list, and that will add the publication to your list. And so now would be a great time if anybody has any questions while we're exploring the Orcid record, then we can talk about this. I also want to bring up now for visibility settings, you have the option and control of setting visibility settings for each and every section in your Orcid account. So for your work section, for example, you can set the privacy settings for the entire section, or you can have each individual item have different visibility settings. So for example, I have a publication here that I have listed as trusted parties only that I don't have available publicly. Most of my other stuff is available publicly, but that depends on my individual settings. So is the content refereed or reviewed by any approving authority prior to publication? So do you mean, Jimmy, do you mean, is it reviewed before getting added to your Orcid account? And reviewed before visible to others. So this is where the manual entry and the source section that I kind of talked about before comes into play. So you'll see here, like for example, on my profile, I've manually entered, the source says me on my record because I'm the one that entered this. But you'll see if something gets automatically added. So this is via Scopus Elsevier. So this is something that was added to my profile through Scopus Elsevier. If you authorize a trusted party to access to your account, the source is going to change as to who added that to your account. So if, for example, you publish with another publisher and the publisher happens to be connected to your Orcid account and imports information into your Orcid account for you, the source is going to change to whoever that entity is. So there isn't really anything that referees or verifies the information being added to your Orcid account. Organizations can ask for things to be removed in some instances, but it's usually on the author or the owner of the Orcid account to properly enter in their publications into their Orchid account. So there isn't somebody that goes through and verifies whether you actually published this thing before adding it to your Orchid account, if that makes sense. No problem, yes. So does anybody else have any questions? If you feel comfortable, I know we're being recorded, but if you feel comfortable and you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, that's fine too.
I'm gonna pause the recording in case anyone wants to just unmute themselves and ask a question.
A little bit more information. Okay, perfect. I do have more information for you. So don't run away yet. In our last few minutes here, I do want to talk about how are some ways that you can use your Orchid record now that you've created it. You have your ID, you have some information in your profile. Now, what do you do with it? So we've successfully connected our Orchid to different accounts and learned how to update them manually. So next, we're going to learn some different ways that you can utilize this moving forward. So the biggest thing that you want to do is share your Orchid account. So for example, with your student email address, or if you have a place of employment and you want to include it in your professional email signature, include it in your email signature. If you work for UNLV, then there is a way that you can get an official UNLV signature, and you can add your Orchid account to your email signature. You can also share your Orchid account on academic or social media profiles listed on your website and include it in preprint repositories if you publish any preprints, like this example from archive.org. So here, Archive, which is a preprint server, is asking authors to add their Orchid IDs to their accounts to make searching for them easier. So you can also search for the hashtag Orchid on Twitter and see the variety of ways that researchers display their IDs on their Orchid accounts, on their Twitter profiles, excuse me. They add it as websites or they add it in their profile, their little bio itself. If you have other social media like LinkedIn, you can include your Orchid account on your LinkedIn account. And finally, the most important thing is share your Orchid record when you publish, when you present, when you do workshops, when you teach webinars, when you teach, include that information when you publish. So as I said earlier, there's over 70 publishers that require or encourage the use of Orchid IDs in publications, and often will post them as part of the publication online. To get the most out of your new Orchid record integration with Crossref, DataCite, and Scopus, your ID has to be included as part of the publication to get counted. So if you don't include your Orchid record when you publish, your Orchid ID when you publish, then it's not going to get picked up by those organizations. So you want to make sure you include your Orchid ID when you submit new publications. And if you haven't done this yet, if you're going through the thesis or dissertation process, you can include your Orchid ID with your thesis or dissertation. So when you submit your electronic thesis or dissertation, you can include your Orchid ID with that submission in the ProQuest database. They have a lookup function in ProQuest that you can look it up to find your Orchid ID, or you can go to your Orchid profile and you can copy your Orchid ID and paste it into the ProQuest system. I would not recommend manually typing it in because if you're human like me, you're going to make errors. So I would recommend copying and pasting into the provided field. And then finally, here's some other ways that you can use your Orchid account moving forward. So the biggest thing here that I want to point out is you can also export a printable PDF version of your profile and use it as a CV if you want to do that. You can do that. And then finally, here's some resources that you can use to learn more about Orcid. And I'm going to paste a link to a handout that I have into the chat. The handout is also available on the Canvas site for this workshop, as well as a copy of these slides, so that you can access this information. So the slides with my notes and everything I talked about today are available on the Canvas site. And then finally, if you want more information, reach out to me. Send me an email. We can set up a consultation. We can chat. We can go more into Orcid and what's out there for you, and we can kind of have a more individual one-on-one session. So I think we have about a minute left if we want any last second questions before we have to run away.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today, Christina. We really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no problem.